Mr. Crispin here with part 2 of assembling my chassis, so we'll get straight into it. Since part 1 I've done a few things. I've drilled and tapped all the holes in these faces on both buffer beams to accept little bolts. I've removed the split journal bearing from these slots, and I've cleaned and degreased everything. The first thing is to say that I've made a couple of little punches for transferring hole positions, 2 different diameters, one for the countersunk holes and one for the little bolts. So I'll just show you a clip of me making these. Here's a quick close-up of the punches, just 2 different diameters with little spikes on the end, and I'm going to temper them as if they were an impact tool. So on with the build, and I'm doing it on the milling machine table, just because it's the biggest flat surface I've got. The frames obviously sit like this, and the challenge is to get all the bits in and to keep them parallel, level and square. So the first thing to do is get the buffer beams on each end and get it relatively squared up. So to give myself a good chance of doing this, I'm going to do it slowly using clamps, and I'm going to build the components in one at a time and spot through at various stages, and I'll explain this all as I'm going along. Now, to stop myself having to continuously hold these up, I'm going to get my 246 blocks and G-clamp those on, just so that I'm not forever battling with them. Check that we're still seated down. So there are the 2 halves. Now to try and attach the buffer beams on. So I need some way of making sure that is parallel to the bed, and I'll probably use 2 stacks of slip gauges. While I do this, I'll just lower this end on to make sure that that's roughly parallel. Now back to this end. Right, so that should now be parallel in relation to the frames. And that should be up against both ends of the frames. What I don't know is how square it is, but these have been machined as a pair, and that's a flat back, so that should be square, but I can check later on. So I think what I'll do is clamp these up. So this is just squeezing those 2 sides up to sandwich it in position. I can take my slip gauges away now before they tumble out. I'm using the slip gauges down here just to feel on both sides that they're about right. You don't, of course, hit onto the slip gauges, you move them and hit and then bring them back in. The other thing I can do is bring my square in and check that face is square down at this end. I'm happy with that now, so I'm going to find some more clamps to lock that in and then start bringing a few stretches in the middle. Thought I'd give you a change of scenery. There's the front, there's the back, and there's the milling machine head swung out of position. So what I'm going to do now is take 2 stretchers and clamp them on the inside to try and bring a bit of the flex out of this. I've brought you back up so you can see what's going on. First thing I'm going to do is just take a stone and make sure the faces don't have any high spots, so that when I bolt the stretcher on, it sits flat. This is the stretcher that's going on, and I'm going to work out its position and then build 2 stacks of slip gauges to hold it in place. I'll just do this up gently for now. I can see that there's a slight bow out to the middle, so I'll put one down here before tightening it up fully. I don't mind tapping gently onto the slip gauges here because there's a big surface area in contact. Right, so there we should have a pretty parallel chassis, and it should be pretty square, but I've not done any checks on squareness yet. There are 2 checks I can do. One is to put a square across here, and I can see that's not bad, but it needs a little bit of adjustment. To quantify how out of square it is, I can take my feeler gauges and see which ones will fit in. 0.15 doesn't quite, 0.1, it's about 0.1, fourth down. So I can tap that out by nudging a few things. I can go through and do that on all 3 of them. Having been down the line all around in the same fashion, that is that this side is slightly further back than this side. So I'm going to tap that side forward, so I'm going to slacken the clamps off slightly first. See if that's moved anything. Right, having tried to square all these up for about half an hour, I haven't got very far, and I've found out why. One thing I haven't checked is the overall straightness, and what I've actually got is a bit of a curve at the moment, so of course using a square on these sides gives you misleading readings if the thing's curved. So to try and straighten it up a bit, I've got a long straight edge down the back here, and I'm just tapping it with a mallet to try and square it up a bit. Just got a little bit of rock this way, so I know it's bowing towards me. With the addition of an extra clamp, I've got it straight now, so I can go back to trying to get these square with a bit more success, hopefully. I'm happy with how these have squared up now, and although that tells me these are all square, I can do one more check, which is to check the frames in general are square. So I can put a 3/16 rod through these 3/16 reamed holes, and it turns freely. There's very little play in there, so I know that they should be pretty well aligned. I can notice a few points down the chassis. And that just tells me that they're lined up. So now I'm going to start drilling holes in the stretchers. So using this little punch I showed earlier, transfer punch, I can spot one hole through. And the method I'm going to use is to put one screw in from this side, one in from this side, put it in, and then move on until I've all got one screw in, and then that still gives me a little bit of freedom to move things before all the screws go in. Hopefully this doesn't move anything too much. And I now got a centred hole. I'll give you a close-up. Looking next to the clamp, you can see the centre punch in the middle of the countersink. You probably can't see it, but I can go and drill and tap these marks now. I won't show the drilling and tapping. Now I've got a hole in each side, tapped M4, but rather than going straight in with a countersink, I'm going to use a big flat washer and a cap head. With a countersink it obviously is self-centering, so you're only ever going to get one position with it. But this way I've got a little bit of play before I move on to the other screws, and it just allows me to make any minor adjustments without being tied down to one position from the very start. So I'll do those up gently, and then I can still tap it if required. Now to perform the same trick on the rest of them, and I'll reappear on camera once all of the stretches are in. Right, so that's all of those in with cap heads. I can mark the rest of the holes through now, and should I feel the need to adjust any of these before I mark the holes through, I can. So it's starting to look like a locomotive chassis now, and I can check there's no rock across the datum edges, which there isn't. And I can also check overall straightness. And it's bowed a little towards me, so I can try and correct this now before I put the rest of the screws in. That's nearly taken it down. I just ever so slightly slackened all these cap heads off to allow a bit of sliding. Whereas if I'd used countersunk screws, I wouldn't be able to slide anything at all. At the moment, the threaded portion of the cap head bolt is moving within the clearance diameter for the M4 screw, and the washer is just letting it slide over this main surface rather than getting stuck in a self-centering cone. So now hopefully if I tighten them up again it'll stay put. Now to take my transfer punch and spot through all these other holes. So there we are, that's all the stretchers in. It's all still flat, there's no twist in it, and it's pretty much as straight as I can get it. All that remains now is to screw the buffers on, and the first thing I'm going to do is check that they're still in the right places, because obviously they're only clamped in at the moment. And then what I'll do is spot through with a little punch that I've made, and then I can drill them. Having drilled all those holes through, I can now tap these back into place. And now it's somewhere near, I can just use my slip gauges to reposition it. So to attach this on, I'm going to be using little bolts, 5BA, and they can go through the first piece of angle, through the chassis plate, and screw in to a tapped hole in the inside angle. And once I've done that, I can put a nut on the back if I feel like it. That's that on with 4 bolts. I've not quite got enough to put them all in yet, but I'll order some more. Now to do the same on the other end. Well, there is the assembled chassis at last. I'm very pleased with the outcome. It's gone together smoothly, it's flat, there's no twist in it, the sides are square and everything lines up nicely. And moving on from here, I will be building the cylinders, one on each side. They'll be machined out of solid blocks of mild steel, and I'll be putting cast iron liners in, so that'll be one of the next things coming up. But other than that, it's nice to see it assembled finally and all looking how it should do. And I hope you found this interesting, and see you on the next video.